The films that have preceded this, that dealt with the blacklist, the ones that leap to mind are The Front and Guilty by Suspicion, both of which were historical fictions. And this film, in a good way, is able to name names.
Yeah.
With the exception of one character that's a composite, basically everything we see is how it went down.
Pretty much, try to be authentic at least. Not every chronological event is exactly as it was, but we tried really hard to be completely authentic to each character, what each and every one of them was up to. We did tons of research, interviewed the daughters, and even got to talk to Kirk Douglas before we started shooting. But there are two composite characters. One is Arlen Hurd, who is a composite of 3 at least of the Hollywood 10 writers. Alva Bessie, who actually did fight in the Spanish Civil War. Ring Lardner Jr., Ian McClellan Hunter.
Ian
McClellan is in the film, but I'm sorry, Albert Maltz, who is the other one. And maybe Sam Arnitz too, because I think he actually did get sick. So John made this choice he had written a draft with all 10 of them, and it was 200 pages long, and it was hard to keep them all straight. And instead of choosing, one or two, except he did choose to portray Ian because he was so close to Trumbo, but the rest he didn't want to do a disservice to because he just thought each one has interesting aspects, so he combined them all into Arlen. And then he made, I think, a good choice of having Arlen, because these guys generally be further left of Trumbo and be kind of harassing Trumbo for his hypocrisy and that's, again, all authentic to the essence of what happened, very much so. We really wanted to get all of it right, but it's still a construct, an interpretation of history. It's not, as John said, it's not history, it's a story about history.
So one of the things I think is best about the film is that it's not that insistent sort of Hollywoodized feel of like here's the hero marching into battle and the music swells. It does have a balanced view of mostly through the family story how this took a toll on him and how he in turn kind of took a toll on his family. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of anti-heroic quality that lives right alongside the heroic quality?
Yeah. He was a great writer, I think. He was really talented, but he drove himself in such a crazy way. He was to a dysfunctional degree. He was addicted to the writing, but he was also driven to be a great storyteller. So it's a flip side of function and dysfunction, and it did have a high cost for the family. Especially once they were blacklisted, because he'd worked his way up from nothing. He started as a baker who was writing, working crazy hours all night long as a baker, and then writes his way into being one of the highest paid screenwriters there is at that time in 1947. And then, he's suddenly shut down, called unpatriotic, un-American, even though he's written only mainstream films, including patriotic war films like 30 Seconds Over Tokyo and A Guy Named Joe. And then he has to figure out how to keep it going, and the price of that was, because he was suddenly making very, very little, he had to write way more scripts, write other people's scripts, rewrite them. And it started to become an obsession to use writing to defeat the studios at their own game, to do so much good writing and make so many movies under pseudonyms and fronts and assumed identities that eventually it would collapse. And we have him say that to Arlen Hurd, but Arlen's his friend who takes him on about it says, well, you just want the money, and you just want the awards, and you just want the work, and just some of it is true.
The communist and the capitalist. It's
exactly.
an interesting.
He wasn't a very good communist because he was also a capitalist. It's tough to be both.
Do you think being blacklisted actually improved his writing?
That's a really good question. I feel that it's tragic that he couldn't write for 13 years in a comfortable setting and be rewarded for doing his very best work. He couldn't get awards when he won them, because imagine how much better he might have been if he'd been able to make the kinds of films he had been making. He had to suddenly write for people who made, very low rent films just to stay going. That guy, Frank King, ended up being a great ally and enables him to write a brave one too, but he had to moonlight to do that. He was spending all his time writing films that weren't that great. So I'm sure that the adversity drove him, and there's probably definitely a certain upside, and he ends up winning 2 Academy Awards writing Exodus and Spartacus while he's blacklisted. So he was motivated, but I can only wonder what he might have done if he could have just been allowed to keep going at the level he was with the great stars he always had access to, and the studio resources that he always had access to. So he was able to get it done, get other things done. But imagine all the other writers who weren't as confident, let's say, or felt as entitled and resourceful. Imagine how much we lost at that time from those great writers who just stopped working. And actors, actors just disappeared, many of them. We met Lee Grant, who, was shut down from age 24 to 36 just because she spoke a eulogy at a blacklisted actor's funeral and said, but she thought the blacklist was partly to blame for killing him, which is a strong thing to say, but it shouldn't get you fired and kicked out of your business.
Well, and this is fascinating history, especially for Hollywood buffs, and for those who aren't, I think they'll be amazed.
I hope so. I hope it drives them to dig into the biographies and all. There's tons of available factual stuff too, in addition to some really great movies about it.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the modern resonances that occurred to you about how this dovetails with what's still going on in the world today?
Yeah, I've said this before. It's not an original thought that using fear as a way to get people to conform. When you think you're the real American, to scare people into conforming your way, and to say if you don't sign a loyalty oath or conform to my form of Americanism, you're a traitor.
I noticed, Jay, you're not wearing your flag pin.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a good point. And that we had that in the campaign. We played that with. Will Ferrell, we kept growing the flag pin, if you don't wear as big a flag as me, you're not as American as me. Yeah. And that seems like a go-to propagandist's bag of tricks, and that now it's fear of terrorism or fear of immigrants or fear of Islam, fear whatever you can conjure up to kind of get people to turn on each other, to turn on their neighbors. It's tragic that it seems to still be pretty easy to use fear to attack people.
So going back a little bit, how did this project originate? Did John McNamara write this on spec? How did it come to you?
I don't think he was ever paid to write any of the drafts. He optioned the book himself. And then he wrote on it for about 7 years, and then by the time I saw it, we were just looking for a financier, and I got to help him develop. So we kind of worked on spec until we found a financier ourselves. But he was doing all the writing. I was just giving him ideas and helping with the research. We got to meet the daughters in that phase because I had suggested he meet them, and we met Kirk Douglas and a few other people. We met the biographer Larry Sepler, who wrote a book that's co-authored by Chris Trumbo, who had died before the book was finished. And we just dove into the authentication of the whole thing, and that was a great process. And then we took it to financiers and Cranston about the same time, and that kind of, once we got them, it sort of launched the whole thing.
And was that the first time you worked with Bryan Cranston? I'm interested in sort of your journey with him. Yeah. Because you're also going to be moving into. Have you filmed all the way?
We filmed all the way. We've wrapped shooting about 3 weeks ago. I'm just in the middle of editing while I'm talking about Trumbo. I'm looking at cuts. But we just started working on Trumbo and felt we had a good collaborative process. I had seen him do Johnson on stage before I saw him, before we started shooting Trumbo. So I was sure he was capable of that larger than life presentation, which Trumbo definitely that was authentic to him because I had seen him do it so beautifully on stage. He won the Tony for it.
Yeah.
So, and now we've shot the film version of it, it's not just a film of the play. The screenwriter adapted the screenplay to be cinematic and to be shot like a regular movie for HBO. To come out next May. He's a fantastic storyteller himself, Bryan, and there's a lot of overlap between him and Trumbo. He's got a great passion for storytelling, and he's a writer and a director, and so I just to collaborate with someone who's kind of throwing in as many solutions for the directorial challenges as he is for the performance stuff is really fantastic.
Yeah. So you shot the film in Louisiana primarily, with one day in L.A.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you shot in that one day in L.A.
Well, we shot some footage in Simi Valley to put mountains behind the ranch.
Oh, I see.
And we shot the car driving up, and we shot some typing inserts. And we had originally had a scene that we were going to include that took place on a back lot at a studio, but it seemed a little forced, so we ended up not using it. But yeah, almost all of it's in Louisiana, which was terrifying at first for me because it's a Hollywood story. It's an LA story. Why not shoot it here? And could we tag up with all the landmarks? But so much of 1947 Hollywood doesn't exist anymore, and there are a lot more old buildings in New Orleans than there are in LA that have been preserved.
And one building in particular was used for, it seems like almost a dozen scenes in the film for different settings, right?
Which building? I'm trying to think.
It's escaped me. It's a historic building. I think that's.
Oh, the Roosevelt Hotel, maybe.
Maybe.
Because that is a great hotel, and it looks a lot like the LA places, and we ended up feeling like we got a sense of period, because there were so many buildings built before the 40s in New Orleans that it was okay. It wasn't ideal, but once you go to a tax break state like that, you get many, many more days of shooting because you saved enough money to, off of everything else by getting called a kickback, but it's actually just a subsidy,
Right, yeah.
A legal subsidy, let's be clear. That really was great for us to be able to do that, and I wish it was a little more sense of place, but we were able to use real stock footage from the 40s. That did exist. 40s LA did exist in stock footage, so that enabled us to get a sense of place. Yeah.
How is it that you came to directing in the first place, to film directing?
Oh, that's a good question. I was in school down here in the Bay Area at Stanford, and I was pre-law and taking economics, and majored in economics, and I started working at the radio station. Someone from the station was here today that I worked at, and I started working in public affairs and sports. And I was editing my pieces, the halftime shows and public affairs shows on, in those days we had to cut it up on tape and splice it with tape, with Scotch tape looking and stuff. And I just started enjoying storytelling, and then I started shooting stills. I really thought I would be a documentary filmmaker. I applied to USC Film School thinking I would go into documentary, but they were actually a little stronger at that time in narrative filmmaking, so I sort of got the bug of working with actors and telling narrative stories, and that was it. Then it was 10 years of total, poverty, living in one room in a house with 7 other people, and a long time. I taught there for a while, worked as a writing assistant for a long time.
And what was your big break?
Mike Myers saying you should do Austin Powers. I gave him some notes on the script, and he liked them, and took me in, and Bob Shea, the head of the studio, with a big table of people, executives, said, "Who are you? We're not going to just hire Mike's buddy." And I had to pitch the Fembot sequence, which I had helped come up with, and I talked them into letting me do it. And Mike fought for me like crazy, so that was it. So then that was my big break, and I got to play in the comedy world for a long time, and I still do, and I will always want to, but I also got an opportunity. Sidney Pollack invited me to come in and talk about Recount, because he couldn't do it anymore. He was just getting sick, and really mixed feeling at that moment. But I told him I'd help him do it, and I took it over, and at his request, and that was it. I got to now be considered, you get typecast, so I could be considered a person capable of doing dramas, and
you get sort of typecast in political films now too, right?
Yeah, now I have to break out of that
Yeah.
particular stereotype. But I love telling stories, and I'm glad I can find a way to have drama in good stories in the comedies and comedy in the dramas, because in most cases people cope with dire situations with humor and wit, and usually dark humor, which is my favorite. These men were that. They were satirists and humorists and witty people, as well as being driven political fighters, and that's, I think that really helped me to be ready for that, and to be able to work with people like Louis C.K. and John Goodman. And
well, you give it a light touch that
I hope so,
that allows it not to feel self-important. It'd be easy.
I hope you're right. Keep
for that
telling
to
your
happen.
friends that, because not everybody, I think, expected that to happen. So.
Yeah. Well, it's been great talking with you.
Nice to talk with you too. Thank you
hope we'll
so
see
much.
you here again.
Great questions. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Good conversation.